You have Bibles today, Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 through 7 is what we're going to be looking at. If you didn't get a message outline, there's some out back there as well that you can pop out and just go get them and come back in as well. How many of you are kind of surprised that we're actually living in the year 2025? I got to tell you, I am. When I watched Back to the Future 2 when I was a kid and they were talking about 2015, and to realize that's 10 years ago now, this futuristic movie, that really got my attention. But you know, with the coming of the new year comes a season when many of us set goals or resolutions. How many of you in here actually set New Year's goals or resolutions? Raise your hands if you do. How many of you did not? Raise your hands. So why didn't you? Why didn't you? Because if I'm positive after reading the Bible, I believe that knowing where you're shooting is a biblical thing. I think we should be setting goals, but why didn't you? I thought I heard somebody say something over here.
Set goals every week or every day.
Okay.
And I don't have to do it once a year.
Yeah? How many of those are big? That you accomplish every day? Ah. So you're being resolved on a daily basis with a new commitment. I understand. Failure. There's the reason most of you don't set goals, isn't it? You're all afraid of not keeping them. You have a perfectionist streak inside of you that just tends to ruin the ability to know kind of where you're going with some of these things, right? By the way, I find it very fascinating, and I just read this for the first time. I always knew it happened. Most people are afraid of not being able to keep their New Year's goals or resolutions, but do you realize that on Friday, January 10th, it's not a holiday, but it's an observance day, and they actually call it Failure Day. Because the statistics would show that by the second Friday after the New Year's, most of you have failed to keep your New Year's goals. And yet, sometimes we allow this perfectionist streak to stop us from setting them. But I think goals are very important for us. I will be totally honest. I set some. I actually set them, and I'm trying to journal with them and create the structure underneath to make sure they can happen, a lot like what Tom was talking about there. And here are my goals for this year. I actually set the goal to get in better shape and eat cleaner foods. I've realized that since I've joined this blessed body of believers, my blessed body's been expanding. And so we got to work on that a little bit more. And so I've started making sure that there's time on my calendar to go to the gym. We're planning out these things. And even in the first week, I've seen a couple little results, but I feel better from eating better things. My second one was to get my finances in shape so that I can be completely debt-free by the end of 2025. And it's very attainable if I use some discipline. And so that's a goal. We started budgeting. We started doing all these things so I could get there. But the one that God has really imprinted on my heart and my mind is I set this goal to have a deepening, attentive life with Christ. And what does it mean to be attentive? It means to be paying attention. Right? That you're paying attention for the presence of Jesus in the daily aspects of life. It's an awareness of God's presence that no matter what you're going to, what you're doing, that Jesus is there with us and that he can have a part in it. I want an awareness of God's presence, his leading, his purpose, his passions, living from a place of rest and intimacy where I learn that it's more important to be with God and then to do out of that being with him. Those are my goals for this year, and I think those goals could easily succeed, but they could also easily fail too, and so it requires this determination to make sure that we are constantly moving. Many of you have set goals. It might not just be a New Year's resolution, but you set a goal. Why do we set goals? Absolutely. Absolutely, it provides direction. So what would it be like? So last week we took some time off. What would it have been like if we took some time off, wanted to go somewhere, but didn't know where we wanted to go? Let's say this, that all of a sudden we sat here and Lisa and I look at each other and like, so we're going to take a day trip. Where should we go? And we just look at each other and we're just like, I don't know, where do you want to go? I don't know, where do you want to go? And if you keep having that circle, you just keep going around. But where do we end up going if we don't have a goal of where to go to? You stay home. You just keep going in this circle. If you don't have a goal, forward movement is impossible. You are just going to stay where you are, or you're going to venture out and just like a step or two and then get lost. This is what's going to happen. This is why goals are good, because they help us identify and to pursue the things that we desire or that we want. One of the things, actually yesterday was the day that my 2-year anniversary was here. And I've had a chance to talk to many of you, and a lot of you have said that as a church, many of us have this desire of wanting a deepening relationship with God. We set these goals to read our Bibles more, or maybe just even read them, or develop a prayer life, or we're going to serve, or we're going to teach our kids maybe some scripture memorizing techniques, whatever it might be. I think to sum up what I've heard from the church with this as a goal that we have as a body of believers is that we want to know him more. In fact, I think this is one of the things I'm actually calling us to as a church. And I think this is something that we all can do, is I want us to commit to memorizing these verses. And so these are the OGC verses for 2025. You're going to see them often because this echoes the heart, I think, of where we are. This is the goal that we need to be shooting for as a congregation from Philippians chapter 3, verses 10 through 11. And this is Paul laying his soul and his passion on who we are to be. And so this is why I think this is a great theme verse for us. And so I'm asking you to do this. By the Christmas Eve service of 2025, now, I saw the Buddy the Elf sign the other day that said Christmas Eve is like in 50 weeks. So there you go. You got 50 weeks to memorize these 2 verses. I think everybody in here can do this. Memorize this, and may this be our goal, that I may know him and the power of his resurrection, and may share in his sufferings, becoming like him in his death, that by any means possible I may attain the resurrection from the dead, in essence, to be with Christ. So the key part of this verse is, what is Paul actually praying for? That he would know Christ. And by the way, knowing somebody is not just knowing the facts about them. It's not just the head knowledge. It's not just studying them more. So here's the thing. I know my wife's height. I know her weight. I know her eye color, her favorite flower, and I know her birthday. Does that make us married and having a good relationship? Nah. If I know all those things about her, if I know that her birthday is May 10th of 1980, which places her just about 6 months older than I am, I love it. Had to put that one out there for you today, Pumpkin. But if we don't celebrate her birthday, what's the point? It should be a big deal to me if I know her. And I think that's the same thing that God wants from us. Do we really have a desire to know him? Because that's where we are. If we really desire to know him, we need to know his character, his nature, his passions, his purpose, what makes him tick. If this is our goal, this, friends, is why we are doing the 40 days of prayer, where we're spending the next 6 weeks getting to know the character and nature of God. That draws our focus into him, which leads us to greater depths of intimacy that for many of us, I'm praying like we've never experienced before. And that's why I'm asking you to go through this prayer guide, let it be a tool to help you enter the presence of God. And so today, as you can see where week 1 is, we're focusing, and honestly, if you didn't get this from all the songs, that every one of them dealt with holiness today. This is where we're going, and we're actually going to see the story of God's holiness through a passage that Isaiah himself experienced. So Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 through 7. Isaiah had a vision here, but I want to give some backstory before we get there. So if you don't have your Bibles, make sure to open it up. We will be hitting on these passages. The words will come up in front of us. And so in Isaiah chapter 6, verse 1, it starts with these words. In the year that King Uzziah died. which I think is a great captivating part, right? It's almost kind of like how Charles Dickens started A Christmas Carol. it's here. The year that King Uzziah died, and we find the story of King Uzziah in the book of 2 Chronicles chapter 26. He died, which we believe, between the years of 740 to 739 BC. Wow. That's almost 2,800 years ago that this actually took place. And yet, what Isaiah's vision of is happening right now. And I find this incredibly fascinating. And so let's focus in on King Uzziah. King Uzziah was a king of Judah in the kind of the line of the kings. And Judah, if you remember, was the southern kingdom. And King Uzziah actually reigned for about 52 years. And this is a long time to be king in this area. And he was a guy who actually wanted to follow after God. His dad and his grandpa and a lot of the people in the line of kings that were coming through this time, they were rejecting God. They were worshiping things that were only satisfying their own tastes, their own good, and they were evil. King Uzziah came, and he started to seek God. And now all of a sudden there's some faith here. There's improvements in society where there are some construction projects. God was doing some good things, and Uzziah saw much success. But there's a human component in this now as well, because as soon as somebody experiences just a little bit too much success, what is the problem that they end up usually having? Pride. Pride is something where we think more of ourselves than we should, or we think that we're better or that we're equals with something. And in essence, what King Uzziah forgot was that the only reason these good things happened was because God was the one giving it. It would be like us as a church going out to the parking lot and celebrating, look what I did. That's what happened to King Uzziah. And what happened was now is we find this story in the second half of 2 Chronicles. Because of this pride that took over the heart of Uzziah, he decided one day that he was going to go and make the priestly offering before God in the Holy of Holies, the temple throne room that his great, whatever grandfather Solomon had built. And if you remember, the Holy of Holies, the only people who are supposed to go in there is the high priest. The priests were the only ones who were supposed to make the offerings. And yet Uzziah decided one day he was going to take an offering of incense, and he was going to go and he was going to worship God on the altar of incense. And the priests were trying to tell him to stop. Don't do this. Don't defile who God is. You cannot do this. And he's just like, God's already blessed me. It's fine. Let's just do this. I can do it. And so he went in there. What happened to King Uzziah? Oh, how many of you have ever heard of seen pictures of leprosy? Do it after lunch maybe instead of before, or else you won't be able to eat. It is a horrific thing. It is highly contagious. It turns your skin white with this infection that just won't go away, and it can totally ruin you. It can destroy your limbs. It can kill you. And because Uzziah went into the presence of God in a way that basically just spat in the face of God and his holiness, he was made a leper and actually had to declare, in essence, that he was unclean. He had to live in his own palace. He had a regent as his son who was ruling for him now because he couldn't go near people. Just imagine this. If you had leprosy and you go to Thompson's after church today and you're going to push your cart to go through the store, you would have to do this. You would have to shout like this, "Hey, I'm unclean. Stay away from me." What a daily reminder of the sin that you had just committed with that. That the reason he was unclean is because he approached the holiness of God and rejected it and now became leprous. And he was cast from God's presence. But the problem is that Israel, and Judah to be particular, this part, had been doing this all along. As a matter of fact, in Isaiah chapters 1 through 5, we find that Isaiah was sharing with them, hey, God's going to come and he's going to enact some justice here. He's going to make things right. But Judah actually found themselves mocking God and taunting him. And that's what we see in Isaiah 5 verses 18 and 19, where I'm going to skip down to 19, where it says, who say, let him be quick, let him speed his work that he may see it. Let the counsel of the Holy One of Israel draw near, and let us come that we may know it. When you read those two verses just on their own, they look really cool. But the problem is this is actually a taunt when you read it with the rest of them, of saying, you're pronouncing judgment on us? Bring it. It's in essence them going like this. We don't think you're going to do it. Our ways are just fine. We'll believe it when we see it. Boy, doesn't that kind of look like the world today? Yeah, God, we're just going to keep doing what we want. You bring it. We'll see if you're actually really there. There was no fear or no honor of God. And that's what they were saying. And so while all this was going on, and now all of a sudden the king is dead, and his son after him was not one of these good guys that was coming. And so Israel is rejecting God. The king is dead. All these things. Isaiah is in the temple and in essence mourning before God. We find that in the midst of this rejection, God showed up to show him what is real and what is true, and gives us one of the greatest pictures that we have, because we see God's holiness on display. And so I want you to picture this. And this is exactly what Lane was singing in the last song that we looked at today. And so in the year that King Uzziah died, I, Isaiah, saw the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up. And the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him stood the seraphim, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Each had 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face. With 2 he covered his feet. And with 2 he flew. And I know they're using it in the singular version there. There was not just one seraphim. It was a host of them that were there. And one called to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the thresholds shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. And I, Isaiah, said, Woe is me, for I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. And then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a burning coal that he had taken with tongs from the altar, and he touched my mouth, ouch, is what I would have said there, and said, Behold, this has touched your lips, your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for. What a picture of the throne room of God, of his holiness, of his grandeur, of his majesty. You know, we spent today singing about holiness. Let me ask you this. What is holiness? To be set apart, pure, sin-free. The dictionary actually sums it up like this, because in this picture we see God's holiness on the display. And it says that holiness is this: moral or ethical wholeness or perfection. To be set apart for divine service, to sanctify. To basically be saying holiness and imperfection cannot coexist. That's where Lon's set apart comes in here. Perfection. Set apart, pure. Friends, every part of God's nature is perfect. That's what holiness means. You realize that when we say that God is love, and I believe that's week 5 that we're actually going to look at here, it's a holy love. And by holy, it means that it is morally and ethically perfect. It can never be greater than it is, and it can never be weaker than it is. Because as God is holy, it means that his love is perfect for you. Can God ever love you more than he does? No, because his love is holy. Can he ever love you less than he does? No, because his love is holy. It is a full, encompassing, complete love. This is the holiness, that God's grace is holy, that it is pure, that it is perfect in its motivation, in its expectations. God doesn't give grace simply to get something. God gives grace because he is a holy God. He gives mercy because he is holy. I think this is kind of an interesting one, that God has a holy anger. Most of us don't think that anger can be holy. A lot of us would say that somebody who is characterized by being an angry person is somebody who doesn't have it together. And yet God operates in holy anger. What separates God's anger from the anger that usually happens to us? So if you're angry with somebody, what's usually at the root cause of your anger? Well, selfish, you want it to be your way. You were offended. Right? What leads to the most marital conflicts? Women. Very good, thank you. Oh, you said what? Money. I was like, well, if we're going there, Lon, we're going there. I'm going there. No, where? I'm not going there. I'll go your money route. Why is he still alive if that happened? That's true. Boy, maybe I do need to go get my ears tested. There we go. So money is often type of thing. What is the result of a money inside of an argument is that one of the spouses had a disagreement with the other and you feel a rejection from it. Or they're not seeing it your way. Why don't you do this way? I asked you to save this type of money, and then it usually comes from an internal part that we didn't get what we wanted. And a lot of times that's what leads to our anger. But there is a righteous anger that God possesses that doesn't have any of those selfish things. God's anger is all about holiness. He is angry at sin. He is angry at the things that hurt us. When Jesus went into the temple and turned the tables over in the Gospel of John, why did he do that? And was that okay? Because it says that he chased guys with whips. Could you imagine that right now if somebody came in with a whip and started whipping it around, chasing us all out of here? Why did Jesus do that? They were defaming the temple by blocking people's access to him. They set up their stuff in the court of the Gentiles. And so now all these Gentile believers who were coming in, they could not go in and worship God. And so Jesus was angry with the fact that they were desecrating the temple with changing money and blocking worship. That seems like a really good reason. Is God angry at sin? Yes, he is, because it kills us. And it violates his holiness, because perfection and imperfection cannot coexist, as we'll talk about in a moment. Every part of God's nature is completely perfect. And that's why Isaiah gave us this vision of the heavenly throne room. And I want us to go through that for a moment. And just picture the holiness and majesty and glory of God being described there. He was sitting upon a throne. That invokes power and majesty. And by the way, it also says that it was lifted up and that the train of his robe filled the temple. What's the train of a robe, by the way? What is it? Yeah, it's a material that comes behind you. Like you'll have a wedding train if you're doing that. If you've ever watched like one of the royal weddings or even the coronation that happened with King Charles recently, it takes like 6 people to hold up their train as they're walking into the church. God's train filled the temple. He filled it with his presence. And above him stood seraphim, an order of angels. And I find this incredibly fascinating that each one had 6 wings, right? It's not the picture that we see at Christmas where it's a guy who looks like a human with 2 wings in this white robe. That's not it. As a matter of fact, Ezekiel gives us a picture that these dudes got eyes all over the place too. And yet they had 6 wings in this one. 2 where he covered his face. Why would these angels have wings to cover their face? Even these seraphim knew they couldn't match the glory and holiness of God. And they had their faces covered. They had their feet covered as an avenue of showing the lowliness of their state. And they had 2 wings on their back, which they used to worship and obey God with. The seraphim, that if one showed up in here, every one of us would pass out dead from, hid itself from God's presence. Wow. And they called to one another and said, "Holy, holy, holy is God." Why 3 times? To make sure. By the way, when a parent repeats themselves, what does it mean? I'm dead serious. Now what happens when he repeats himself twice and says it 3 times? Boy, this is implying the perfection, the personification of it. God is holy, and the whole earth is full of his glory. And I find this fascinating. The foundations of the temple. And by the way, these were made out of stones that are so huge. It's not just the little bricks here on the side, but picture this, that at the voice of God, this place would just shake. And the whole place was filled with smoke. Why smoke? Okay. Fire purifies. Yeah, if you remember when Moses was out on Mount Sinai and he was getting the 10 Commandments, what was the entire mountain covered in? Smoke, denoting God's presence. It was filled there, the fire that is there, the purity. If you're going to purify something, a lot of times you can purify it with fire and heat and it'll make it right. Right? I believe I read that in Zechariah where it says the refining fire of God. This is the throne room, and we see his full glory on display, similar in Exodus 19 or Revelation 4 or Ezekiel 1. They're all similar in this depiction of this heavenly temple. And so looking at all of these things, my question for you is this: how would you respond to that? How would you respond if God ushered you right now into his heavenly throne room? I'm in trouble. Would you be overwhelmed by its beauty? Yeah, you want to know how Isaiah responded? I am lost. He had no time for the beauty of the heavenly display. He knew that he was imperfect and he was hosed. Because sin and perfection cannot be together. When he was faced with the perfect, powerful God, Isaiah realized his sinfulness and imperfection. And honestly, we cannot gaze upon a God and live in this type of way because his holiness will snuff us out of existence because we can't even come close to measuring up with his perspective. This is Elijah when God showed up to Elijah on the mountain and he was passing by, and he passed by in the fire and the earthquake and the wind. How did God appear to him? In a still small voice. When were Moses and Elijah at different points allowed to come out there and see this figure passing by? It's after he had already left and just looking upon his back. You cannot look at the face of God in his glory and his holiness and live, and Isaiah knew it and he felt it. He felt the impoverished spirit. He knew that he couldn't exist and he was done. As a matter of fact, it reminds me that when holiness and imperfection cannot coexist, holiness will always extinguish imperfection immediately. In the book of 2 Samuel, there's an unfortunate guy in chapter 6 whose name is Uzzah. And Uzzah was a guy who experienced this. One day, King David and the rest of Israel wanted the Ark of the Covenant, the presence of God, to reside in Jerusalem. The problem was it wasn't there, and they had to go get it. And so these guys who had nothing but the noblest intentions went and picked up the ark, put it on top of a cart, and carried it with some oxen to go back towards Jerusalem, where the Ark of the Covenant would reside. The problem is one of the ark stumbled, the cart was about to tip over, and the Ark of the Covenant was about to go splat on the ground. And there was a guy named Uzzah who said, I can't let God's ark touch the ground. And so he reached out his hands and touched the ark. What happened to Uzzah? Instantly. Don't forget the instantly. He didn't just get a disease and have to linger for 20 years. He was dead on contact because they did not regard God's holiness. God told us how we were supposed to carry the Ark of the Covenant with these two posts being carried by the Levites. And they did not do that. And when imperfection came into contact with perfection, it was swallowed up. His holiness is that powerful. And it leads us to ask the question, if God's holiness is that powerful and I am imperfect as I am, how can I ever have, relationship with him? Because much like Israel, I think our world is very cavalier to God's holiness. As a matter of fact, chapters 1 through 5 of Isaiah said it. Romans 3, verses 22 through 23, reminds us of this thing, where these people are claiming to be wise, humanity. They became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal men and birds and animals and creepy things. They disregarded the holiness of God, set up idols to suit their own purposes. And if we think that we don't have idols, we're mistaken. The idol of money, the idol of fame, the idol of sports, the idol of family, the idol of job, anything that takes the place of God is an idol. So how do we respond? Because they thought they could treat God and approach him in any way possible that suited their needs. But God's response to Isaiah is different, because holiness and imperfection can't exist. How can we have relationship? That's where verses 6 through 7 come in. Where a seraphim took a burning coal with tongs from the altar, because even he couldn't reach into the altar because the altar was holy. And he touched my mouth with that burning coal. You ever burn the roof of your mouth with like hot pizza cheese before and have that sit there with you all day? Just imagine having a live coal being placed on your lips. Now, why did God do that? Was it to punish Isaiah? Nah. This is actually one of the passages of such amazing love like you'll never get, because this was God, through love, making a way for relationship to be there. Where Isaiah now, where it says your guilt is taken away and your sin atoned for, this was God calling Isaiah to the prophetic ministry that was going on. He cleansed him, made him holy. God did the work of sanctifying us so that he could make us holy. You can't enter God's presence without being holy. So he did it for us. He did it by grace, and he did it because he loves us. And what an amazing picture this is. And so, friends, as you are going through the prayer guide throughout these next weeks, and even this week, I wanted you to look at this question: how does God's holiness impact me? Why is this important for us to stop and to look at the holiness of God? And so I wanted to give you a couple different questions, about 3 of them or so, that you can evaluate throughout the week as you're going through that prayer guide. The first one is this: how does God's holiness impact my worship of him? How do you enter his presence? Am I singing for him? Do I do everything for his glory? Your job, sweeping the floor, cleaning the toilets, washing your car, whatever it might be. How does it impact my worship of God? Let me ask you this. What was your car ride like when you came here today? Fast. Cold. Were you trying your hardest just to get here on time but didn't get yourself in a right position to worship right away? Did you spend time praying to God that your heart would be made right to enter his presence and give him all the glory that was possible? Or did you take your flip-flop off and have to spank the kids because they're fighting in the back? Did you get in an argument with your spouse on the way in today that really is impacting how you're worshiping? I don't know what the story is with you on that one, but I think there are a lot of things that sometimes get in the way from us experiencing what God really has for us. We need to remember he is still on the throne no matter what our circumstances in life that we're dealing with, and that God is there for us. The second question: does God's holiness cause me to hate my sin and to desire righteousness? Or do we simply just give sin a pass in our life? Does your sin bother you? I think that's a good thing to actually look at. Do I desire good in my values and choices and actions? Is my intimacy enhanced knowing that God made a way for me to experience him? I love this verse in Hebrews 4:16, that without Jesus, this would not even be possible. Where he says, let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace. By the way, where is that throne of grace? It's the same one we just saw in Isaiah, with all those seraphim flying around with smoke and a train that is there shouting, holy, holy. Do you realize that because of the blood of Jesus, you have access to that and you can just walk in? And you can do it with confidence that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need because of the blood of Christ.